In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So thank you for the committee for arranging that nice game. It was fun. So today we're going to be speaking about, as you know, finances and marriage, which is an important topic because a lot of times finances can be a reason for a lot of conflict in relationships, especially when the two people that are getting married either have very different economic situation, like growing up, or they just have different ways of approaching money and seeing, what would be considered reasonable purchase or reasonable cost for things, which I think some of the questions today highlighted that maybe we have a different idea of how much things cost, but also what would be a reasonable amount to pay for certain things, especially when the category of what's being purchased tends to fall more on one side or the other. So for instance, maybe men like to spend more money on technology and electronics and sports and things like that, and women want to spend more money on fashion and beauty and things like that. And if both people, don't see eye to eye on what's valuable, on what actually is worth, spending $185 on an NFL game, for instance, or spending, how much was it? $125 on eyelashes. So there could be quick conflicts and things that come up in relationships. I want to speak a little bit about some biblical principles when it comes to finances, as well as some practical advice. So the first, I think there's 10 points. The first point is something pretty basic, which maybe we don't think about necessarily with this topic, but it's hard work. And this is a principle, of course, it's in the Bible. We read in Proverbs 10, he who has a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a wise son. He who sleeps in harvest is a son who causes shame. Working hard doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get everything that you want or that you're going to be able to afford everything that you desire. But if you have two people that do not work hard, then it's usually a recipe for financial failure. And there are always being things that you want to have, or that you need and that you're not able to obtain, and which again can cause a conflict between the two. So if you have one or the other of the couple, they're just, they don't work very hard. They haven't been very career minded. Maybe they didn't spend a lot of time in education or getting college degrees or advanced degrees, and they're not really interested or haven't really thought about money from a younger age, which of course we know that building a career is something that takes a lifetime. And that you really start making decisions that are going to affect your career even while you're in grade school. For instance, some kids that just they don't care about their grades, they don't care about the effort that they're putting into things, they consider that these things are not important, and then time after time we see examples of them who, when they get to college or graduate and they feel like they've wasted a lot of time, they are not able to get into the career that they want, they're not able to get the salary that they want because they have made poor decisions from a long time ago. And this is why it's important to teach children the importance of hard work and diligence and studying and grades and so on. Not because the grades is the goal, but the idea of being able to work hard and to earn and to succeed with the best of our ability. So if you have someone who hasn't established that or hasn't learned that and is looking for an easy way out to make money without having to work hard, this can be a problem in and of itself and can amplify any financial issues they have, because maybe I'm not even meeting my potential of what I'm able to earn or what I'm able to do, because I'm preferring to do other things other than to invest time in my education, in my studying, in my career, to work hard and so on. So that's the first principle. The second principle, though, is when you have now people who are working hard, they a lot of times can overwork. Okay, because now it starts to become a goal, an ambition, a target that I have. I want to succeed. I want to have a certain rank or position. I want to earn a certain income. I want to advance myself, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's also such a thing as having an imbalanced life, because I'm spending too much time trying to work and to earn money that it's not because I need it. It's just because I want it. Also in Proverbs 23, it says, "Do not overwork to be rich, because of your own understanding cease. Will you set your eyes on that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away like an eagle toward heaven." So money is not everything. and even though yes, we need it, but there is such a thing as trying to pursue it too much at the expense of everything else, at the expense of my spiritual life, at the expense of my family life, at the expense of my health. There is such a thing as overwork. And so we need to understand like where we are in the spectrum. On the one hand, it's like, okay, like work is the last thing that I want to do, and I don't really apply myself as I should. And then on the other side of the spectrum, I'm even sacrificing other things that are very important just because I want to make more money. I make decisions based on primarily what's going to earn me the most money, and maybe I work very, very long hours that I don't really need to, just because I want to have extra money, right? And then, of course, there's always this question: it's like, how much is enough? What is the right balance? And this is a very personal question, and I'm not saying that there's a generic or general answer that will apply to everyone, right? How much is enough for our needs? What define need? Right? What does it mean to need something? One family might say, you know what, because of like the moral failure that exists in our society, we want to put our kids in private school. Like, let's say that's a decision that they make. If they make that decision and they say, okay, well, the only way for us to afford putting our kids in private school is that we have to refrain from spending, we have to work extra hours, we have to do this, but the goal is something good, and it's even for a godly reason. Like, that's a reason why maybe I would be making sacrifices like that for that family. Like, that's what they've decided. Another family says, you know what, putting my kids in public school is fine. Like, there's not any problem with it, and they're gonna be fine, and we're gonna teach them good principles at home, and they're gonna be fine. We don't have to necessarily save for that. But another family might say, well, but we need to save for college education. Right? Like, so there are reasons to save, and there's reasons to work hard, and there's reasons to be careful, and so on. But while doing all of that, being careful not to work just for the sake of having luxury, right? Because maybe if I'm sacrificing so much, I'm sacrificing the time with my family consistently, I'm sacrificing my spiritual life. I can't go to church, I can't have time to raise my kids in the church because I'm just working. Now, there are times where that might be necessary for some people, like from a financial situation, like they need to have multiple jobs even to be able to live and to meet the needs of their family. And I'm not talking about that. That's not overwork. Yes, that's hard work, but it's not unnecessary work. But there is such a thing as unnecessary work that I'm just working more to meet my desires that I don't really need, and I'm sacrificing more things that are important to get there. His Holiness Pope Shenouda, he said about this, he said, so we should give the body physical rest, for it is not a sin, but rather a divine commandment. A person should be wise so as not to exhaust his body beyond its power, nor give it more rest than it needs, which leads to laziness or sluggishness. I remember a professor of medicine in London who said to me, I cannot prevent you from hard work, for your responsibility requires that, but I prevent you from overwork. By overwork, he meant work that is done after a person becomes exhausted and ought to have stopped. He said to me also, the work you do happily and joyfully will not injure your heart, whereas the work you do when feeling annoyed and troubled will exhaust you physically. Feeling delighted in work makes one not feel tired. Of course, we would all love to enjoy our work and to enjoy what we do. Maybe sometimes it's harder than others to get there, but that can be a goal that we have, is don't just pick a job based on the salary, but pick something you enjoy to do, pick a career that you enjoy to do. The third point is the stewardship of God's resources. In Colossians 3 it says, and whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. So this is a question, especially for those people who have wealth and riches, right? What is my responsibility with them? What is it that I should do with them, right? Are they completely up to me to decide from A to Z, how is it that I want to spend this money? Again, the idea that God has granted us certain gifts, has granted us certain talents, He has granted us certain possessions, and He is calling us to spend those talents and gifts and resources in a way that is pleasing to Him, in a way that He would like us to do. And again, yes, there is a lot of personal decisions that are made in deciding, is this something that is pleasing to God or not? But it's an important principle for us to keep in mind. So one of the principles, for instance, that's outlined very clearly in the scripture is tithing, right? So tithing is something that God is calling us to be good stewards of our money by saying part of this actually goes back to Him, okay? But that's not the only principle, right? There's the principle of like how is it being wasteful for me to spend money on certain things, right? Is it far beyond my ability, right, to like spend money on something that actually should not be, I should not spend it on. It's wasteful. So this is an issue here where we get into some maybe potential conflicts between the spouses, because what looks like reasonable for one person might look like very unreasonable to the other. And then at that point, we're having to have this discussion of what is reasonable, what should we spend our money on, how should we handle it, and it can cause some kind of tension if not dealt with, if we don't communicate it effectively, if we don't try to decide ahead of time, like what are we comfortable spending with, and we'll talk more about that. Unity and communication. You know, in Amos 3:3 it says, "Can two walk together unless they are agreed?" And so when you have a marriage relationship and people coming together and becoming one and involving themselves in each other's lives in every possible way, how is it that they can walk together unless they are agreed, unless they agree on a path of life, they agree on certain decisions that are being made? How can we have peace and harmony in our relationship unless we are agreed? And so how is it that we can come to that point of being agreed? Right? If two people are exactly aligned on what is considered reasonable, how they want to spend their money, everything like that, that would be great. But that's probably unrealistic. People coming from different places, caring about different things, having different hobbies, having different levels of wealth, thinking different amounts of spending is more reasonable or not, usually they're not going to agree automatically, right? And this is where communication comes in. Like having, especially at the beginning of a relationship when you're still kind of not sure, or maybe you've made assumptions as to what the other person thinks is good or reasonable, is having like discussions about finances, making decisions together about things, especially like large purchases, you know, as opposed to one person, they buy whatever it is that they want, another person buys whatever it is that they want, and then only later they find out, and then they get into a conflict about it. It's like, why did you spend all this money on this, right? Unity also comes in the idea that we are combining our finances. You know, some people, they prefer to keep their finances separate, meaning I have a checking account and my salary comes there, and my spouse has their checking account and their salary comes there, and everyone essentially spends their discretionary money from their own salary. This is not a good idea, right? Because you are wanting to combine everything, right? You are one now, and you're wanting to make financial decisions as one, and so you're going to make those decisions based on the total amount of money that you have together. And it doesn't matter who earned that money. It doesn't matter whether one person's salary is higher than the other. That doesn't give that person who makes the more money kind of more influence or more authority to make these decisions than the other. This is something that is shared commonly and equally between the two people. And so definitely, like, there has to be a lot of discussion about this. When you have a situation where a person who is a spender marries a person who is a saver, right? It requires a lot of communication, a lot of agreement, a lot of compromise, a lot of intentional discussions that we have, knowing how is it we're going to spend our money. You know, one approach that works for some people is, you know, whenever you have very different views on how much money you should be spending, is each person can be given kind of a budget of discretionary funds that they can spend on what they want in a month. So like, let's say you decide that, you know, $500 or however much, okay? I have $500 to spend on things that I want, kind of based on my own interests, my own hobbies, things like that, and my spouse also has the same amount, or maybe it could be much less than that. It just depends on your financial situation. And then that way, as long as you stay within the agreed upon limit based on whatever budget that you guys have decided, then it could be something that we know it's not going to harm us financially. We've already allocated this money for this, and each person at the same time feels they have some autonomy and some, you know, ability to do the things that they're interested in, especially when the two people have very different interests, right? And when they have very different interests, it can be the case, it's like you look at your spouse, you're like, why are you spending this much money on this? Right? Something that is, you know, you feel like is unnecessary, right? So if you're starting to find yourself in a situation like that, I think one of the most effective ways is to just decide ahead of time how much money each person can spend on their own thing. Of course, there's going to be the majority of the expenses are going to be common. Like you're going to have a mortgage and you're going to have to pay utility bills and you have insurance and you have, whatever common expenses. You have children, you pay children's expenses. The majority is going to be common expenses. But especially when the family is struggling financially, or, they're trying to save for some future event that can happen, and you're really caring about saving, you have to be very careful of how much money you spend. Especially when the two have very different, philosophies of spending versus saving versus spending. Budgeting and planning is, of course, very important. Proverbs 21:5, it says, "The plans of the diligent lead surely to plenty, but those of everyone who is hasty surely to poverty." Also in Luke 14, it says, "For which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it?" So sometimes we have big dreams, right? But those big dreams are not practical unless you first sit down and you figure out, what do we need, what resources do we need in order to fulfill and accomplish those dreams? Is this something that is possible within our budget? And if it is possible, what decisions do we have to make now in order to make this possible in the future? And definitely an important way of doing that is one, tracking your expenses. Like there's software like Quicken and other things that will let you track your expenses, download your transactions from your bank, look at everything that you spend, and then you'll be able to look back and say, well, how much money did we spend on groceries? How much did we spend on utilities? How much did we spend on entertainment? And then really be able to figure out, like, okay, how can I alter and adjust my spending to better fit my goals? Okay, so tracking that, and then based on that, budgeting, like, okay, moving forward, I think, we're spending too much money on entertainment, we're spending too much money on utilities. Maybe I can go shopping for find cheaper utility, like electric companies. Sometimes, like, we spend so much money on electricity. There's sometimes other companies where you can, like, drop that a little bit, but you got to figure it out, like, where is the money going, how much money I'm spending, and then decide how much is reasonable to spend in order to start saving for something that I want in the future. Right, and of course, and this isn't intended to be like a comprehensive, talk about saving, but, of course, there's investments, there's retirement, there's college for kids, there's, short-term and long-term goals. There's all these things, right? And all of them, like, are based on one principle, and the principle is restrain yourself from what you want now in order to get something else later. So it's a delayed gratification. When I am, and this is really the choice, right? The choice is, there's something I see now, there's something I want now that maybe I can't have now because I've made a decision that there's some more important goal of something that I will want to attain later on, right? And this is the planning part and the budgeting part. Making a will, for instance, is also part of this. If you want to decide exactly how your possessions, your money are going to be distributed after you're not here anymore. Maybe having a financial advisor to help you with, like, finances and risk management and all of these things. But the idea is, pay attention to this. Like the more that you have these discussions, the more you work through this and look at the information and the data and try to, like, make good informed decisions, the more likely that even if you had two people from different places, they can come together and see the reality. For instance, sometimes, like, let's say a person grew up in a household where money was not an issue, and pretty much whatever they wanted, they were able to get. They never really paid attention to how much things cost. And then they marry, and now in this new relationship, they can't do that anymore, right? Because now we have more limited income. We're still starting out. We have a lot of expenses, and we can't just buy whatever we want. And maybe sometimes, or what I've seen, is some people who maybe grew up in a household where they could have everything they wanted. They don't even know how much things cost. I think that's part of the reason we had, like, this game at the beginning, right? We don't know how much things cost. We don't know how expensive it is to live, and what percentage of my salary is actually going to these essential things. By looking at all this data together and studying it, understanding it, and knowing it, right, then even a person who's coming from a background like that, like, it hits you, the reality hits you. It's like, like, for me, even to have a house, can I even afford that? Like, where do I want this money to be allocated? And going back to the first point about working hard, like, it definitely makes you feel like the money that you're earning is something very precious and valuable, and something that you don't want to squander, because it is difficult and work is difficult, and you spend a lot of time in order to be successful. So definitely having these talks with each other, and being on the same page with all your current financial situation, knowing what your goals are, how do we get from here to there, is very important. Also having emergency savings. Also in Proverbs 6 it says, "Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer, and gathers her food in the harvest. How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall your poverty come on you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man." So speaking here about the lazy person, right, the person who doesn't want to work, and because they're not prepared, right, when something comes on them, your poverty shall come on you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. But even if someone is not struggling with laziness, the idea of having some emergency money, some people, unfortunately, they don't have the ability to live except paycheck to paycheck. It's like the moment that I get money, I have to spend the money on essentials, right? And that's their situation. Ideally, though, you would be able to save so that at least you'll be able to live for like 3 to 6 months, assuming you lost your job, assuming something happened and you're not able to earn your normal income. I have some savings, some buffer, so that I can continue to live without it being kind of a catastrophe, without us having to sell our house, without us having to, take a reverse equity loan on my house, without having to, do certain things that are not very good financial decisions because of an emergency situation. So again, it's all coming back to the idea of planning ahead and not giving myself everything that I want in the moment just because I happen to have the money or because I want it so badly. All of the points and all the scripture that we're reading kind of focuses on that point. Seventh is avoid unnecessary debt. I found this anonymous quote. It says, "The only reason a great many American families don't own an elephant is that they have never been offered an elephant for no money down and easy monthly payments." Yeah. And when you think about it, it's true. Like the kind of stuff that people own and how much of it is useless and has no real value, right? Only because it's available. And you compare yourself to other people and be like, well, this person has an elephant, so I want an elephant too. And we listen to our kids. The kids are the ones who want the unreasonable things oftentimes, and we don't want them to be upset. We don't want them to feel less than others. And so we're like, okay, we're going to give you this too, right? But do I have the means to give it? The whole question of obtaining everything that I want, that's like a different issue, and there's problems with that in general. But do I even have the money? The number of people that go into credit card debt, for instance, in order to buy the things that they want, this is very high. Most people are in credit card debt, right? And credit card debt is the worst debt because it's the debt with the highest interest rates to pay back, and it keeps people in poverty. It keeps people struggling financially. All the money that I'm making, I'm paying the interest to the credit cards. So definitely, like, live within your means. Don't get for yourself bad debt. There is such a thing as good debt. Like, for instance, something that you buy that appreciates is good debt, like a house. So, for instance, if number one, you need a house to live, so it's useful, it's necessary. Two, if the house is appreciating in value, then you spent money and went into debt to get something that is ultimately going to pay you back because its price is increasing. When you come to sell it, you will actually be making money, because its price will have gone up. So there are sometimes we can't afford the things that we absolutely need unless we go into debt. Like most people couldn't buy a house unless they get a loan. But there are better decisions. There are things that are better than others. Some people will say, well, what about a car? Should you go into debt to buy a car? Some will say, okay, well, the thing with the car is depreciating. So you're definitely going to lose money, right, when you buy a car. But a car is something that's important and necessary. How much debt are you willing to go to buy a car? Managing debt is a huge part of all of this. And again, if you have the mindset of I just want what I want right now, it's nice and new and shiny and I want it, right? Without thinking about what it's going to be, it's just adding more payment on my monthly bill, which I can afford. Okay, but you're how much of that you're paying interest that is not going back to you, that is not building your savings, that it's not eventually going to be useful. You're just spending more money than you need to, paying for something. You're paying other people that let you borrow money, right? Not the actual value of the thing that you bought. So definitely avoiding unnecessary debt is a very important part of this. Also, the scripture speaks about this, and it says in Proverbs 22:7, it says, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the servant to the lender, right? Because the person, once you're in debt to them, now you have to pay them back, and you're in service to them. Do not be one of those who shakes hands in a pledge, one of those who is surety for debts. If you have nothing with which to pay, why should he take away your bed from under you? Meaning, if you don't have the ability to pay back the debt, right? And this is not a decision to be made by banks, by the way. You know, like whenever you apply for a loan, then the underwriters of the bank are going to study your financial situation, look at your credit score, do all that stuff, and then decide whether this should be approved or not. Fine. That's from the bank's perspective. The bank doesn't care about you. The bank cares about them. They just want to know that you have enough collateral so they can confiscate it in case they need to, in case you can't pay back your loan, right? But that's not where you want to be. The question for us to ask is, am I able to pay back the loan while still having enough for all of the things that are necessary and important for me? So we need to differentiate between what we need and what we want. And understand that not all debt is the same, right? Like I said, there is some good debt, but prioritize paying off debt. And this can be also difficult because when I say, you know what, I'm going to take more of my money and I'm just going to pay off old debt that I have, like, yes, on the one hand, it's good to pay off that debt. On the other hand, I feel like, well, I'm not able to buy the new things that I want. So it goes back to the principle of, controlling what we want, not buying things that we don't need, not being pressured to buying things, and having a good plan for our lives, and this ties into contentment, right? Being content. In Philippians 4 it says, not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. Like St. Paul, when he's speaking about his contentment, he was like a king, because no matter what situation he was in, whether he had plenty or he didn't, he was fine. He was happy. He was content with what he had. He wasn't expecting more than what he had. And so he was never disappointed. Like a person who gets disappointed is because they have such high expectations that are not met. But a person who is content says, whether I have enough money to go on all the vacations I want, or whether maybe something happened and I don't have the money to go on those vacations and I don't have the money to buy the car that I want, I'm fine. Like, thank God we're fine. St. Paul, he said, with food and clothing, these will be content. But in our society now, very few people are content with food and clothing. If all they had was food and clothing, but they didn't have all the fancy things and all the new things and all the things that everybody else has, maybe we find ourselves not being content at all. So learning to be content is an important principle, because one other thing that will happen is if I'm always looking for some financial success as being what was going to make me happy, the moment that I get that success, I'm going to start comparing myself to the next thing, right? What is the next thing that I want for myself? Comparing myself now to a higher tier of people that have the things that now I should be able to have. And then when you attain that, then that's the same thing is going to happen. The people with, $100 million yachts are looking to the $500 million yacht people and be like, well, you know what, their yacht is better than mine. Right? It doesn't matter how much you have. The principle of wanting more is constant everywhere. There was back in like the 2008 housing crisis, there was a man who was a billionaire. He lost half his wealth, so he only had $500 million, and he committed suicide because he lost $500 million. Yeah, $500 million is a lot of money to lose, but you still had $500 million left, right? Like, but. And it's easy for us to laugh at that, but we're the same. Like, let's say I have $100,000 in the bank and I lose $50,000. That's very difficult, right? And maybe I'll be very upset. But there are some people who have $10 in the bank, right? And when they look at us and they say, you have $50,000 left in the bank, why are you upset? You know, but what is it that, from my perspective, I've lost? But from their perspective, even me in my lowest state, I'm still much better than them. So the idea of contentment is, don't try to just compare with other people. Don't try to compare with who has more than you. Be thankful for what you have. Work within your means to try to grow yourself. But if God doesn't allow that, then it's okay. We're happy with what we have. The 8th point is tithing. In Proverbs 11, it says, there is one who scatters, yet increases more. And there is one who withholds more than is right, but it leads to poverty. The generous soul will be made rich, and he who waters also will be watered himself. Meaning, the person who doesn't hold tight to what he has, but he's willing to share it, he's willing to scatter it, meaning he's willing to give to all those who are in need, right? Compared to the person who hoards it and keeps it to himself, right? Actually, the person who's the hoarder is going to be led to poverty because God is not going to bless them. And the person who is generous is actually the one who will be made rich. Also in Proverbs 28, it says, he who gives to the poor will not lack, but he who hides his eyes will have many curses. So the principle also here is that we are not alone in this. Like, God is the one who grants blessing to us, whether it be financial blessing or otherwise. And he is calling us to serve one another, to give to one another, to help the poor, to not hold so tightly to the things that we have received, and to identify them as being from God. Like, God has granted this to me, right? And so I'm willing to give it. Like, it doesn't belong to me. Like, I'm not the owner of it. God has granted me access to it. God has granted me as a stewardship of it, but he also wants me to share it with other people. And this is the principle of tithing. So this is also very important. The people who learn to tithe from a young age are typically much better off financially than those who do not. And this is important to start young, right? Like, when you first get an allowance, and for your children, teach it to them when they first get their very first allowance. This idea that not everything I receive is mine. Like, I receive it, but part of this I give back to God. It belongs to him. And because starting tithing at an older age maybe can be difficult, especially if I'm already struggling financially, or I perceive that I'm struggling financially, or I perceive that this money that I'm now going to give up is something that I wanted to use some other way. A lot of people keep putting off the idea of tithing because, I can't afford it now. Tithing has nothing to do with whether you can afford it, right? It's not a concept of affording it or not affording it. It's not mine, right? It's like taking somebody else's money. That doesn't belong to me, even though, yes, it's in my paycheck, but it doesn't belong to me. So I'm giving it to God who granted it to me so that I could give it to him, and he can do with it what he wants. And then his response here is, don't worry, I'll give you more. Like, don't worry, I will bless you more. Like, don't worry about the money. It's not about the money. The one who grants us the greatest financial success is not because I'm really smart and I work really hard and I have a high salary and I do these things. God is the one who can grant opportunities. God is the one who can allow us to have that job that can grant us these things and do these things. So God's blessing in our finances is the greatest blessing, more than the planning, more than the budgeting, more than any of the other things we've talked about so far. And this is definitely not something we should neglect. The 9th point is teaching our children. In Proverbs 22, it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So teaching our children these principles from a young age. I'm a big proponent of giving your children allowance and then allowing them to spend that allowance on anything they want, as long as it's not harmful. Allow them to make poor choices. Allow them to, it's like, okay, if they think, oh, you know what, there's this thing that I really, really want, I'm going to spend my entire savings on it. Okay, you can tell them, that's not a very wise decision. You're going to spend all of your money on this thing, but I'm leaving it to you. It's up to you. If you want to spend this money on this, you can spend it. And let's say they do, and they're like so happy they have this thing. And then the next time they want something, they look and they say, it's like, you know what, I don't have any money. I spent it all. It's like, well, too bad for you, because that's what you chose, right? Like, they have to feel the pain, right? And the earlier they feel the pain, when the stakes are very low, the better. This is how they learn that there's a finite resource and that we have to be wise in how to manage that resource. Contrast that with parents that just like give their kids everything. anything they want. And sometimes the parents feel, again, back to the whole comparing thing, is the kids come and says, oh, my friend in school has these shoes, my friends in school has this thing, I want to have it too. It's like, oh, too bad. Can you afford it? No, you can't afford it and you can't get it, right? Because if you make your kids feel like there's unlimited resources, and the moment that they want anything, because we love them as parents, we're going to get it for them, maybe actually we're doing them harm. You know, maybe we're not teaching them the important principles that they need to learn, so that when they get older and now they have their own money, they can make wise decisions about how to manage it. And sure, maybe God is going to grant them a lot of money and a lot of blessings. That's great. But even when you have a lot of money, you still have to be wise, right? And how is it that you're going to spend it? Because there's always something to spend your money on, like $125 eyelashes. It's only 60? We go with the official prices of the... So it will teach them how to manage the money well. It will teach them to learn from their mistakes, okay? Because they will make mistakes. And actually, we shouldn't jump in and try to fix their mistakes. The whole value of this is so that they make mistakes, they feel pain from the mistake, and then they don't make the mistake again. So again, as parents, maybe looking at what they're doing, we see that it's the wrong decision. And we can guide them. I was like, I don't think this is the best choice, and here's what you should expect, and so on. But if they want to make it, let them make it, right? Let them make it. They will correct themselves quickly. And so also teaching them to tithe at a young age. When you give them an allowance, you are saying, look, here's your allowance, here's $10 or whatever, and $1 of this is your tithe. Meaning $1 of this goes to the church, and God uses it to serve the people. Okay, and so from a very young age, they understand that they don't get to keep it all. Okay, also it teaches them to plan and work hard. So like if they want, to buy a certain thing that costs $100, and they know that they don't have it now, so they say, you know what? How long is it going to take me to save up for this? And in that time of savings, right, there's going to be other things that they like and they want to buy, but then they have to make that decision. It's like, well, if I spend the money on this, then I can't save up for the thing that I want. So, I'm not going to buy it. That's a decision that they have to make, but it's something we can help guide them in and teach them these principles again from a young age. As I said, working hard is also very important. I'm also an advocate for making our children feel like, okay, like what, if you do really good in school, then I'm going to give you a gift of some sort, like some financial gift perhaps. Again, this is all up to each parent how they want to do it, but it makes them feel like, what, when I work hard, there's financial reward. This is actually the real world. In the real world, when you work hard, you get money, and when you don't work hard, you don't get money, right? There's nothing wrong with that. This is all a part of teaching and training kids what is valuable, right? What is valuable? What's going to make you successful in life? And then the last point I wanted to mention is leaving a legacy. In Proverbs 13, it says, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous. Meaning, if we are wise with our finances and God blesses us and we are seeking his favor in our lives and God grants us this blessing, then we will have not only enough for us, but we will have enough for those who are going to come after us. Right? And we can leave it to them. Be like in this here saying, you will leave an inheritance to his children's children. Like God has blessed me so abundantly that not only am I content and have everything that I need, but I also have enough to leave to the next generation and to the generation after that. And so again, like this is something that we think about. Like, what are we going to do with the wealth? And maybe part of the wealth is a blessing for our children to also help them in their lives. And be a source of blessing to them. So those are the 10 points that I mentioned. The first one was hard work. Second one is not overworking, so don't working too much. The third is stewardship of God's resources. The fourth is unity and communication with each other. The fifth is planning and budgeting. The sixth is having emergency savings fund. The seventh is avoiding unnecessary debt. Eighth is tithing. The ninth is teaching our children about how to manage their money wisely. And then the last one is leaving a legacy or inheritance for our children. Does anyone have any questions or comments about anything we've said?
to ask anonymously, you can use, if you're in the Signal group, there's the link for the Slido thing. You could send an anonymous question so your spouse doesn't know it's you. And so you can do that if you'd like. Do you have the, I don't know if I sent you the link, Abuna, but I think Sharif can put it up as well. There's one on there. You want me to read it to you, Abuna, till I can send you the link.
Sure.
How can we practically come to an agreement about things that we technically can afford, but we value differently and it causes friction?
So can you read it again?
Yes. Sorry. How can we practically come to an agreement about things that we can technically afford, but we value differently and it causes like friction?
So I think if two people, they value it differently because it's something that is, I would call it discretionary. Like it's not something that we need, but it's something that maybe we want. Then again, like you talk about it, but if the end you don't come to an agreement, like I don't know, to use an example, like if fundamentally we're not on the same page as to whether something has value, whether something is worth the amount of money that we need to spend on it, then either, we're going to postpone that discussion again, but that could cause friction, or, as I said earlier, one approach is to have this budget for each person, and however much it is per month, and that person, if the whole issue with this is just the cost, then that person could maybe save up in their budget for it however many months and then buy it. Okay? There's always going to be some things that we don't agree on, and there's some ways that we can try to compromise. Like, for instance, okay, I don't feel we need to spend money on this, and you don't feel like we need to spend money on this, but as a compromise, we're going to do both if we can afford both, or we're going to do neither. But another way, like I said, is each person can kind of save up on their own in that. If it's something that their spouse agrees on in principle, just not the cost of it. Like if it's something that, I don't mind that we get it, I just don't think it's worth the amount of money that it costs. Then there are ways to help mitigate that using by talking about it. But because in the end, if two people are not in agreement and you can't convince the other person of its value, you're never going to get anywhere. You're never going to come to an agreement. You're never going to, unless it's part of a larger compromise, unless there's some system in place to help facilitate that. Just trying to convince each other back and forth, you're not going to convince a person that something that you think has value maybe for them has value. And again, it depends on the thing, but again, I'll use the stereotype, like the sporting events thing. Like if a guy, for instance, is very into sports and he likes sports and he wants to spend money to go to sporting events, and his wife doesn't care about sports. She doesn't care about sports at all. She thinks it's a big waste of money, and sporting events are expensive. So how can he? And let's say their money is limited, or they feel like it's not worth the money to spend on this, or maybe she's saying that to him. It could be dealt with in multiple ways. It could be like, okay, you can do your sporting events, but I get to do whatever thing that you don't think is necessary, but I'm going to do it. And you come to an agreement like, okay, we're going to do that. Like we're going to agree that each person can have their own kind of indulgence in a certain thing. Or it can be like, okay, I can save up in my quote unquote discretionary fund until I can buy the thing that I want. And that way you're limiting the total financial impact of the hobbies of each person, or the individual desires of each person that can cost money. It's another way to do it.
They're coming in.
Okay.
Do you want it?
Did you send me the link?
Yeah, I did. And what's up there now is also, I just texted it to you.
Can you talk about how to decide if it's worth the income loss for a mother to stay at home during the early childhood years? This question involves a lot more than just income, right? Like income is a part of this, but the reason that you would do this is because you think that it's in the best interest of the child, right? So, because the alternative if there's no parent at home to take care of the child, the alternative is that you put the kid in daycare, right? Now, daycare is expensive in and of itself, right? So you're going to be spending money to put your kid in daycare so that you can work, okay? And you're going to have less influence on the child. Not to say you don't have any influence, but you're going to have less influence on the child because the kid is going to daycare full time, right? While the mother is working. So I think the it's not so much about the income loss. I think it's more about what is your goal? What is the thing that's the most important? Like when we said, if money is not the most important thing, I think all of us would say our children are more important than money, right? But not everyone's financial situation allows this, right? There could be a couple where financially they cannot afford that both people do not work, and they have to work, even though daycare is expensive, even though their child is going to be in daycare a lot of hours per day. We can't afford it. It's our financial situation. And maybe that couple will decide, you know what, even though it's not ideal and we would prefer that it could be different, but we have to do this for the sake of our family. There could be another couple, or maybe their financial situation is different. And working is more about just like getting out of the house and wanting to feel productive, and, you know, spending 4 years with children at home constantly is also not an easy thing. And maybe the mother feels like overwhelmed by this, and she feels she can't afford to do this and put her career on hold permanently. Maybe there's a compromise. Maybe I do it for a year or two, and then I find like part-time, a part-time job, and then eventually go back to work full-time. I think these questions are very unique and specific. There is no right answer, right? There's no right answer. Another family is going to say, you know what, I don't want to put my kid in daycare at all. They get sick often. They learn bad habits, they whatever, and so I'm going to make every sacrifice possible, both financially and of my time, in order not to do that. That's another option, right? But I can't say that there's a right answer, right? Everybody's situation is different. Everyone's capabilities are different. Everyone's finances are different. You know, some women don't want to work, and they would love to stay home with their kids, and if they can afford it, this is like the best situation. Like I can't afford it. I don't want to work anyway. I'm staying home with my kids. I'm having the greatest influence on them, and the kids are having the safest environment to be in. Maybe this is a win-win for everyone. Another mother, for instance, she might say, you know, like, obviously I love my kids, but I feel like staying home for 4 years and not doing any work at all is too much. I can't do it, you know. And so maybe I try to find a different solution, or something where I stay home for some time and then I go back to work for a time, even apart from the financial decision. So it's really depending on, the situation at home. What is the church's stance on prenup agreement? Definitely we're against it, right? The prenup agreement is saying, in the occasion that we get divorced, how are we going to divide up our finances? Why are we even thinking that way? Like, if you're going to enter into a relationship thinking of the possibility of divorce, then you're already giving yourself that option. Like, you're giving yourself an out, right? You're giving yourself the kind of like the safety net of saying, like, if I divorce, then that means my financial situation is secure. You know, one of the reasons that people don't divorce, it's not always because their relationships are wonderful and amazing and they want to stay together forever. A lot of times the reasons that people don't divorce they're called external constraints. External constraints are things that prevent you from doing something that you might have otherwise wanted to do, like, for instance, children. A lot of times people don't divorce because of the children. They know that it's going to hurt the children. It's not because we enjoy being together so much. It's because we know that if we divorce, it's going to harm the children. We don't want to harm the children, right? So that's an external constraint. Another external constraint is financial situation, right? Knowing that you're going to have to go through this mess of dividing up your money and dividing up your possessions, and this, it makes it difficult to divorce. And that's actually a good thing, right? It's good to put obstacles to doing the wrong thing, right? Because we believe that divorce is not the right thing. It's on God said in the book of Malachi, God hates divorce. Like, that's the only thing ever in the whole scripture he said he hates, is divorce. So like, he doesn't want it, right? Now, there are some times that it's happening outside of my control, right? But certainly going into a relationship We don't want to be thinking to our mind, you know what, there's a high chance that this relationship might end in divorce, and so I'm going to prepare myself by having a prenuptial agreement, and that way I will lower or mitigate some of the consequences of the divorce. No, we want the consequences of the divorce to be bad, because we don't want that option. We don't want to make it easy to do the thing that we don't want. We want to make it harder to do the thing that we don't want. How do you determine the fine line between being ambitious and working hard for your goals versus overworking? I think the question has to do with what is it you're giving up to work? You know, what is it that you are sacrificing in order to work? Obviously, any work is some sacrifice. Like anyone who has a regular 40-hour-a-week job is sacrificing 40 hours a week in order to work. 40 hours a week should be enough to balance home life and being able to do things with the kids, spending time with the kids in the evening, having dinner with them and the family, doing activities on the weekends, coming to church on Sundays, praying together, reading the Bible, like all the things that we speak about, which is kind of like what a balanced life will look like. If you have a 40-hour per week job, most of the time I would say you can manage it. Okay, you can manage it. At some point, once you say, I'm going to add more hours, okay, well, at what point do those hours begin to prevent me from doing the other things that are important? For instance, at what point can I no longer eat dinner with my family? At what point can I no longer go to church? At what point am I so exhausted that I can't do any kind of spiritual activity? At what point do I no longer have any time to do any service in the church at all? And then at that point, you ask yourself, okay, maybe now this is crossing a line of making a decision for purely financial reasons, but it is causing me to have to give up a lot of things that are important. I don't remember if I gave the example of one time I was with Bishop Yusuf and somebody called him on the phone. We were in the car. Somebody called him on the phone and he told him I was offered a job in Mississippi. And it's a very good job. Salary is much better than what he had before. And he wanted to get Amba Yusuf's blessing to take this job. So Amba Yusuf told him, we don't have any churches in Mississippi. We've never even prayed a liturgy in Mississippi. Ever. Somehow. So nothing has ever been done in Mississippi. And he said, if you take a job like this, where are your kids going to learn? Where are they going to go to Sunday school? How are you going to take communion? Where are you going to have a relationship with the church? He asked him all these questions. And the man, he was like, he wanted it. Right, like he was trying to come up with ways that it could happen. It's like, oh, we could drive 4 hours to go to the nearest church. Like, really? Are you going to drive 4 hours to go to the nearest church? Probably not, right? So you could sense from the conversation that the man is trying to make excuses or justifications because he really wanted to take the job. But when you really think about it, he was going to be making so many sacrifices in order to take this job, which was financially good for him and his family, but were the sacrifices worth it? Again, this is a question you ask. There are some people, like I know a person who like travels a lot. Like he will literally arrive from international flight, land, and go straight to church. Like because there's a church service going on. Like he won't even go home. Like his energy level is such that he can do that. And when the amount of time you see him in the church is so much that you can even tell that he's spending so much time internationally because he's always in church all the time. Such a person is maybe able to have a higher level of time that he would spend toward work without it sacrificing necessarily other things that are important than another person who is like, you know what, I can't. Like I'm going to be too tired. I'm not going to be able to go to church. I'm constantly traveling. I'm constantly doing this. Again, it's a good job, but what am I sacrificing in order to have it? So that's the question you ask. What is it that I'm sacrificing in order to pursue some job or some financial goal? If you allow children to save up and make decisions about spending, does that mean that you don't buy them things they ask for apart from special occasions? There's different ways to do it, right? One way to do it is on the special occasions like birthdays or things like that, you just give them more money. So one approach is, like if you want to do this idea that I'm saying like in the purest way, everything is money. That's all you give them, right? And they manage 100%, everything about them. I'm not saying this necessarily has to be that way, Like there could be things where it's like, okay, I get you a gift. There's something that you want, I get it for you. It doesn't mean that everything necessarily has to be purchased by them, right? But I would say a large amount of the decisions that they make in terms of like financial decisions should be from them. Like it's okay when it's their birthday, like I'm gonna get you some clothes, I'm gonna get you whatever thing that you wanted. And maybe as they get older, a larger percentage of the gifts that I give them could be now money, as they have learned to manage it better, and to know what is it that they want. Like this is an approach. I'm not saying there's a right way. It's whatever really way fits with you and your kids. But all I'm saying is the principle that we give kids money, that they start learning how to spend it on their own from a young age is good. The percentage of that versus other things is really up to you. Would supporting a family member consistently due to permanent hardship need to be a part of tithing? This is something that is very unique, again, to the person. And there have been people who have approached me asking this question. So like, let's say, you have a close family member who is in real hardship, and you feel an obligation to help them financially. And so this ends up taking a part of your income to help this person. Okay, and you feel like it is a great burden, on you, and then on top of that, you're also tithing. So, again, like I don't want to give a general answer because I think it's very specific. But there have been times from the situations that people have talked to me about where I've told them, okay, this can count as, let's say, half of your tithing. So let's say you count this as 5% of your tithing, and the rest of your tithing, the other 5%, you still pay it to the church. There have been other situations where I've said, no, this isn't the same as tithing, and that's why I encourage you to speak to your father confession about it, because he's going to understand your situation better that I can give than just a generic answer, and be able to see, because there are times where people want concessions for things, like, so for instance, like, there have been times where someone, let's say, they say, I want to send my kids to a church camp, but I can't afford it. So can the church help pay for the camp? And of course, the church, is willing to help anyone in financial need who can't pay for a camp or something, that we would pay it 100%. There's no problem. But there could be a situation where, and this happens, where like the person comes and says, I can't pay for the church camp, but they put their kids in private school, and they're putting their kids in all kinds of other summer camps, and they're doing all these other things where there's no option for discounts and those things, right? But they're happily putting their kids in all of that. But when it comes to the church camp, you say, no, I can't afford to put the kid in the camp. Well, it's like, well, is that really consistent with all these other decisions that you're making? So, like I said, these things are studied on a case-by-case basis, and I don't want to give an answer. The official answer is tithing goes to the church, and whatever other commitment you have to your parents or to other people from your family is separate. But again, it can be studied on a case-by-case basis, and if there is a reason why, like an exception can be made in a specific case, that can be discussed one-on-one.